We also spoke with Mthuli Ncube, Chief Economist and Vice President of the African Development Bank, on eliminating poverty in sub-Saharan African countries by the year 2030.
Well, a lot of effort is being, put in eliminating poverty in Africa. Many approaches are being, are embarked on. For instance, at the AFDB, we use infrastructure channels. We use investment in private sector, deal with governance, there are many channels. At the moment, extreme poverty, if you look at those who live below $1.25 per day, you're looking at a figure of something like 48% on average. But it differs from country to country. It is much higher in a place like Congo DRC, for instance, and a lot of progress has been made in Rwanda. It is also lower in South Africa, but Nigeria also has made progress, but it's still high. So it varies across the region.
Now we are approaching the Millennium Development Goals, finishing line by 2015, and eliminating extreme poverty is one of the major, targets of MDG's goals to be achieved by 2015. What is the feasibility of attaining this goal in sub-Saharan Africa, the world's poorest but also, rapidly rising regions? Is it within the region's reach? And also take us through, the targets for post-2015 development agenda for Africa.
Quite clearly, Africa will not meet the extreme poverty target, and we have to maintain it beyond the 2015 agenda and turn it into a 2030 agenda, in fact. And in our view, the best Africa can do in 2030, which is another 17 more years to come, is something like 26%. And even this will require Africa to sustain its current growth in per capita incomes. If we were to achieve a target, let's say, of the order of 12 to 15%, then we have to add an extra 2% in growth in per capita income. So it is a tall order, but it's not impossible. Africa can drive towards it. But the key message is that we still need to maintain the poverty target agenda in our post-2015 agenda.
Now, talking about poverty, target agenda, do you want to quickly talk us through, some of the poverty outcomes that Africa can achieve by 2030?
Basically, one of the things that is holding back poverty reduction in Africa is inequality. The growth spurt that we've seen in Africa in the last 15 years has produced inequality. Inequality has a way of slowing down growth, of making sure that distribution doesn't impact on the poor. So we need to deal with that, dealing with inequality redistribution mechanisms. We also need to deal with social protection in terms of targeting certain groups to make sure that they stay out of poverty. We need to adapt to much more long-term measures such as education. Education investment is one of the key ways of dealing with extreme poverty and make sure that you stop it from being transmitted from one generation to another, this so-called intergenerational transmission of poverty. So there are ways to do this, and that's what Africa needs to focus on. And there are countries where we need to target to bring the overall poverty levels down. Countries with large populations such as Congo DRC, Ethiopia is making progress, such as Nigeria, but also Nigeria we know is capable of making progress. Just from the rebasing story, we know that progress can be made. But we need to focus on those. It's going to be more difficult in more fragile or post-conflict economies. It's a lot more difficult to deal with poverty reduction in those countries.
Now, talking about Nigeria's rebasing, it gives it the more opportunity to be able to sell its country to investors. Economic growth has averaged approximately 7% per annum over the last 5 years. However, these achievements do not reflect on the lives of the Nigerians living on less than $1 a day.
Absolutely, you're right. That rebasing doesn't make people better off the following day. It's just a more accurate accounting of the reality as it is on the ground. But I think that the rebasing has some other positive effects going forward, that investors begin to really see Nigeria as a powerhouse, and we may start attracting more foreign direct investments, and then also portfolio flows into the capital markets. It just changes the whole picture of the country because it's a much larger economy. So that's the positive thing about it. But there I must tell you that there are at least 37 countries in Africa that need to rebase. So it's a big issue. Only 10 countries in Africa, including Nigeria, being the latest entrants, are compliant with the rules of rebasing, which is every 5 years. So if you think about it, if it's 37 countries at least have to rebase, it means that Africa's GDP if they were all to do it simultaneously, could go up as much as 40% from the current levels. That's from something like 1.5 trillion US dollars to well over 2 trillion US dollars.
Now, do you want to quickly talk us through, what can be done to improve upon these outcomes, the poverty outcomes that Africa can achieve by 2030?
We've got short-term measures and long-term measures. On short-term measures is targeted social protection programs. And here Brazil has shown the way that it can be done. But also China has shown the way that it can be done. The second approach, which is much more long-term, is education, skills development, to make sure that people are more job-ready. And number 3 is job creation out of the skills that people have. So there are different steps, short-term, long-term, that can be embarked upon. Of course, you cannot rule out all the investment that need to be done in infrastructure and everywhere. All those have poverty reduction impacts over time, and all should be looked into.